Hello and welcome to Chapter 40, talking about the rise of resurgence of conservatism in America in the 1980s. We're going to finish up Ronald Reagan today and move on to George H.W. Bush, who was just George Bush until his son came along and was the 43rd president. So we're talking about Reagan yesterday, who was swept to power by a conservative wave that was largely, it was aided by the religious right. Religion came back and it pervaded into politics throughout the 1980s. The Moral Majority was founded by Jerry Falwell in 1979. This group, they kind of went back to traditional, strong Christian values. They preached against sexual permissiveness, abortion, feminism, and the spread of gay rights. All those trends had happened in the 60s and 70s, and these people felt it was time to return to what they felt were traditional American values, living by the good book, and living a good, strong Christian life. They had a registered 2 to 3 million voters. They had a huge audience in televangelism using television, and back then there wasn't many channels, but they had a large audience and they were very influential. And they saw themselves as a reaction to the 60s and 70s radicalism. Reactionary is or being a reactionary or reactionism is when you want to go back to the way things was. And so this reactionary movement of the religious right helped sweep Reagan into power because he was a conservative and he did preach traditional American family values. They viewed themselves as Christian, as pro-life. They even took up some actions of civil disobedience, specifically against abortion clinics. Sometimes they turned violent. Most of the time they were peaceful, though. So that's the religious right. Very, a pretty substantial group that had a lot of pull politically during the 1980s. They did fall from grace by the end of the decade. Maybe it wasn't the flavor of the month anymore. People were happy. The economy was back, and so they went back to having a good old time. In conservatism in the courts, they were ruled by Reagan. They were his chief weapon against the cultural wars. So to change things back to the way they were, this reactionary movement, Reagan used the courts. By 1989, he had appointed almost all the sitting judges. There were still a few from actually the Nixon years. Judge Rehnquist was one I could think of, including 3 conservative Supreme Court justices, including the first female Supreme Court justice in American history, Sandra Day O'Connor, who was sworn in on September 25th, 1981. It took a long time, but finally there was a woman on the Supreme Court. She was one of 9 justices. Some of the conservative decisions that came out during the 80s, the courts were used by Reagan as an arm to curtail affirmative action and abortion. Some of these movements in the 60s and 70s that went against what he believed was some of the traditional values of the United States. In 1984, Memphis firefighter case ruled that union rules outweighed affirmative action. So being a part of union or a closed shop was more important in the eyes of law than in terms of affirmative action, giving preferential treatment to underprivileged groups. In 1989, Ward's Cove Packing versus Antonia and Martin versus Wilkes made it more difficult to prove racial discrimination in hiring. It wasn't so easy. Some of these were rolling back maybe some of the radical aspects of the civil rights movement from the 60s and into the 70s, where to give an equal playing field to blacks and whites or even other minority groups, affirmative action was taken up largely during the Nixon years to give preferential treatment, or at least to give them a fair chance to make it equal in terms of hiring and admittance to school. This was kind of rolled back during the 80s. Congress further weakened affirmative action during the Bush administration in 1991. In 1989, Webster versus Reproductive Health Services challenged the landmark case, Roe versus Wade, in 1973. Roe versus Wade was the one that allowed abortion. It ruled that states could have some restrictions at state level on abortions, kind of going back to kind of almost states' rights versus federalism that we saw in the Civil War, but not on that that level. But then in 1992, Planned Parenthood versus Casey ruled states could restrict abortion when they did not place undue burden on the woman. Some states have had more severe restrictions. I know South Dakota has some of the more severe restrictions on abortions. This topic has not gone away. It's still very important to a lot of people. Anytime a justice is, nominated, this is one of the first things that people want to know is what is their stance on Roe versus Wade. It's very contentious, and it is a difficult thing to discuss because people have such strong opinions on it. Moving on, in 1988, there was a referendum on Reaganism, or voodoo economics, or Reaganomics. The Republicans actually lost control of the Senate in 1986. Democrats fought for the double mountain of deficits and savings and loan issues. Some of the deregulation that Reagan had allowed the businesses to kind of do what they want, which helped to lead to a resurgence in the economy, was coming back to bite people because when businesses don't have regulations, then maybe they can take advantage of things, take advantage of the system, the people, and they can cheat and do things and make money that they probably shouldn't. Plummeting oil prices from the Middle East after the oil embargo and all the issues in the 70s were gone really hurt these institutions. And the government had to rescue them for $500 billion. Banks were closing at a rate similar to the 1930s and the late 80s. In fact, several closed in Rifle, where Alpine Bank is currently on 4th Street was a bank in Rifle that was closed during the 1980s. I don't remember the name of it. It was probably like the Second National Bank of Rifle. Who knows? On October 19th, 1987, Black Monday, the stock market plunged 508 points, which was actually the largest one-day drop to that point, bigger than the ones that caused the Great Depression in 1929. The safety nets the United States had helped prevent a depression. There was an economic slowdown that would catch up a few years later during the Bush years, which actually would hurt his reelection bid against Bill Clinton because we were in a recession, but it didn't lead to this all-out depression or widespread unemployment like the Great Depression because of the government safety nets. So in 1988, the Democrats, hoping to replace Bush and the Republicans, Reagan and his successor Bush, ran the Seven Dwarfs for the presidential nomination. Among them was Coloradoan Gary Hart, civil rights leader Jesse Jackson, and Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts. Gary Hart was hurt by a scandal, extramarital affair scandal that didn't help him. Michael Dukakis was the one who earned the nomination. They were opposed by Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, who made a name for himself, had a good record. He worked in the CIA, worked in Reagan's administration, and the vice president. He was pretty well respected. He basically ran on Reagan's record for domestic and foreign achievements, that the economy had rebounded, that this Cold War wasn't as tense anymore, the defense budget was strong, Americans were back to work, and we had confidence that was restored to the levels almost that rivaled the 1950s. Bush won pretty easily as Americans wanted the good times to roll in the 1980s. Very famously, he gave a speech, though. He said, read my lips. No new taxes, which you gotta love the Dana Carvey version of it. Not gonna, wouldn't be prudent at this juncture. And then famously, he raised taxes, which people made him eat crow on that. His opponent was Michael Dukakis, who was filmed driving a tank, which really, really hurt his chances. We'll skip that. You can look it up online. Excuse me. Michael Dukakis was a really short guy. And Saturday Night Live, which is perfect for political satire, really kind of spoofed on it. They even did fake cartoons, or not cartoons, commercials, where they said, George Washington, 6'3", Abraham Lincoln, 6'4", George Bush, 6'3", and then they said, but Michael Dukakis is only 5'5.5". He's too short to be president. And this is a very famous scene where his podium was too big, so he installed a lift to make him see a little taller. Wasn't a big issue, but people really keyed on that. It was funny, and they remember that about Michael Dukakis and him driving a tank. So George Bush is the new president. He was a Yale-educated World War II veteran. He was the son of a senator, made a fortune in the Texas oil business, served in numerous capacities of the Republican Party, When he was inaugurated, there was an air of urgency in the communist bloc. There was a lot of things changing in Eastern Europe. The Scorpions of the song "The Winds of Change," which kind of fit the mood. China, right after he was inaugurated, had a great protest for democracy at Tiananmen Square in the spring of 1989. Bush, who was a part of the delegation that actually formally opened diplomatic relations with the Chinese in the 70s and 80s, spoke that he understood the Chinese. When things turned violent and tanks rolled in and crushed the demonstration, killing hundreds, wounding thousands, the United States didn't take swift action against the Chinese. They basically gave them a slap on the wrist. George Bush gave him a knock and that. Wouldn't be prudent. It's bad. But they didn't do any economic sanctions because they didn't want to hurt this burdening trade we had with China. He was firm to criticize but didn't impose sanctions. Tiananmen Square is widely remembered in America because of the images that came out of it and the news coverage, and most famously Tank Man, the individual here who stood in the way of tanks rolling down the streets of Beijing to Tiananmen Square to crush this rebellion. And everywhere the tanks went, he kind of got in their way and screamed at them. At one point, he climbed up on a tank, yelled at them, and then he ran away. People don't know if Tank Man exists anymore. Rumors are in China that they found him and executed him. Other rumors are around that he is still alive. In China, though, if you search Tiananmen Square, the government filters Google there, and all you get is very nice, beautiful touristy pictures. If you search it here in the United States, you get pictures like this with tanks. So there's a video you can look up. We're not going to show that here. In the Eastern European bloc, though, tremendous change was going on in 1989. The Solidarity, a group that started as a labor organization, became kind of a political wing, ousted the communist government in Poland in August of that year. They actually had a real election without, anyone telling them what to vote for, or they actually had choices. And when the people finally could choose in Poland, they voted the communists out of power. The Solidarity was led by Lech Walesa, and this kind of really got the ball rolling in Eastern Europe. Soon, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, and Romania had communist regimes that collapsed. Czechoslovakia got a divorce. Now it's the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And most significantly, the symbol of the Cold War was torn down. The Berlin Wall was ripped down on November 9th, 1989. It was very sudden. It was spontaneous. It was amazing. It was a worldwide change. And people witnessed history before their eyes. And Germany was reunited within 1 year. Pretty amazing to watch on CNN and on the news. If you look up footage on YouTube, it is very, very fun to watch. And what happened is the Soviets didn't really want this to happen. They just simply couldn't afford to crush, this opposition to take action. Gorbachev, because of his policies of glasnost, which is openness, and perestroika, which was for reform, he didn't want to end the Soviet bloc or end, the Cold War, but they just didn't have the money to do what they used to do. This is a news report. If you look in another bizarre twist, David Hasselhoff showed up at the tearing down of the Berlin Wall and performed, and it's just mind-boggling, this monumental, earth-shaking event that is historical, and then you get like a B-list celebrity to show up and perform. I don't know if there's a modern equivalent, but it's very funny to watch, so look it up if you get a chance. The collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1993, of the Soviet republics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia declared their independence from the USSR. The USSR's Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It was 15 republics in one. And Gorbachev didn't crush them like they would have, when they sent tanks into Hungary in 1956. Hardline communists in the military resisted these changes. They tried to stop it. And Gorbachev just he was with the tide of history. He understood what was coming. In August 1991, they staged a coup. They tried to retake the communist government, these hardline communists, and the military. They even held Gorbachev captive. The people of Moscow protested, though. 50,000 Russians surrounded the parliament building, demanded reform, including the guy in the picture holding the papers here, Mr. Boris Yeltsin. He was the president of Russia, and in the face of this, this movement of the people, the communists understood it was over. And so Boris Yeltsin led the people. The coup collapsed on August 22nd. Gorbachev was released. And soon all 15 republics declared independence, including Russia. So for you former geography students taking a map test, it used to just say USSR. Now you have 15 countries to remember with funny names. A lot of them ended Stan. But hey, communism went away from our nemesis. They formed the Commonwealth of Independent States. And on Christmas 1991, the USSR ceased to exist. A hammer and sickle flew over the Kremlin for the last time. Merry Christmas, America. You won the Cold War. The Cold War was over. Bush immediately pledged $24 billion in aid to the former Soviet Union, which led to new problems. What do you do with all the nukes? What do you do with these countries that didn't get their independence, like Chechnya? Yugoslavia broke into several countries where they tried to do ethnic cleansing, which led to problems in the 90s. And so you just got a lot of problems from the end of the Cold War. Plus, the bad guy's gone. So if anyone, these new countries need someone to hate, they're going to hate us instead of the Soviets, because we have two countries, one's bad, one's good. Hey, we don't like them. But now you take away the other guy. Everyone doesn't like the top dog. So we are disliked. Bush called for a new world order, but he did slash the defense budget by $52 billion. 34 bases were closed, and it kind of helped lead to a recession. That and some of the savings and loan scandals. We just simply didn't need that big of a military anymore because the Cold War is over. There were still some other issues. You had apartheid, was finally cast off in South Africa. Nelson Mandela, after spending 26 years in prison, was released and elected president. And it just seemed like the world was collectively getting to be a better place. And Jesus Jones saying, right now, right here, right now, watching the world wake up from history. It seemed like it was happening in the early 90s. There was even peace through elections. Came to Nicaragua and El Salvador. The Sandinistas went away. And it was a good time to be alive. This is what Europe looked like after the fall of the Soviet Union. Germany's reunited, and it feels so good. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. They're split up now. Yugoslavia, there's Serbia in there, and all this stuff. There's the one little bit of Russia, which always kind of funny, hangs out right, just an island of Russia. Hello. And we will stop there. Next time we'll talk about Saddam Hussein. He's bad. See you next time.